Hi everyone, so today I wanted to start the first video in a series of informative videos that I plan to do that I hope will help beginners. So it's going to be for people that still consider themselves to be beginners to the hobby of looking after and growing cacti and succulents, as well as complete beginners, or even people that are considering starting the hobby but are still a bit unsure about whether it's for them. So to start off with, we're going to go over watering, how to water cacti and succulents, which is probably one of the most important things to think about when growing these sorts of plants, because the way that they're adapted to store water for long periods of time and use only a minimal amount of water, because in their natural environment they grow in deserty and hot and dry climates, which makes them very different to standard plants. So that's really the main thing that people get wrong when they join this hobby. The main killer of cacti and succulents is overwatering. So I thought that would be the best video to start with, is how to water, things to consider when watering cacti and succulents, and just like little tips and tricks for how to spot whether your cactus or your succulent needs watering or whether you should wait. So like I said, overwatering is the main killer of cacti and succulents. If you only take one thing away from this video, it's that you should not overwater your cacti or succulents. I really can't stress how important that is. Now, obviously in their natural environment, they're adapted to only use a little bit of water because of the climate that they're in. Now, it's difficult in cultivation in people's homes and greenhouses, conservatories, etc., because it's hard to replicate that sort of environment. And also, obviously, if you get into a hobby of looking after and growing plants, then you're going to be looking at your plants all the time because they interest you. And that's one of the dangers, is that people kill their plants because of overcare and overlove. They're always looking at their plants. They're always thinking, oh, do I need to water it? Do I need to do this? Is my plant okay? Things like that. So I can't stress how important it is not to overwater. So when you think about, am I overwatering my cactus or my succulent or not, there's a lot of different things to take into consideration. That'll be things like the soil that you're growing your plants in. Now for cacti and succulents, they need very well draining soil. The more well draining your soil is, the quicker the plant will dry out and the sooner it will need more water. Whereas if it's not well draining at all, then the plant will be sitting in water for too long, which will lead to the roots rotting and root rot and things like that. So soil's one of the important things to think about, and I'm planning on doing a separate video later down the line that looks at soil in more detail. Now another thing will be what climate you live in. Now, obviously, if you're growing your plants indoors, you can control the climate a little bit better, maybe with heating or air conditioning, etc. But then the other thing is that in homes, a lot of the time, because of heating and things like that, then the humidity can be affected. Now, luckily for cacti and succulents, they like low humidity, but you might find that your particular home has higher humidity than other people's homes. So again, that can cause problems. And then the other thing is the temperatures. Do you live in a hot country or a cold country or somewhere in between? All these different things you need to consider, because that will affect how often you need to water, how often your how quickly your plants will dry out or how long they will stay wet for. So you need to try and do the best combination of all those different factors, the light, the temperature, the soil, etc., to try and give the best conditions for your plants before you even think about watering them. Even something like the pots that you're growing your plants in can affect these factors greatly as well. If you're growing your plants in a plastic pot, then it will hold the water for longer. If you're growing them in a terracotta pot or an unglazed clay pot, then air can pass through the actual walls of the pot itself, so that will help them to dry out quicker. Now, a lot of people like to top dress their plants. Some people are completely against it, but personally I believe it should be down to personal preference. And if you're able to water your plants properly and keep them alive, then I don't see anything wrong with top dressing your plants if that's what you prefer. However, people say that that will make a bit of a layer on top of the soil that stops water from evaporating as quickly. Now, if you've got a very badly draining soil that holds water for too long, then top dressing can be a real problem because it holds the water in there for too long, which will lead to root rot. But if you've got a terracotta pot that's very breathable and your soil's very well draining anyway, then top dressing might not have much of an effect because the pot's able to breathe and water's able to evaporate quickly anyway. Another thing to consider is the actual season that you're in as well. So you might live in a cold climate anyway, but then when it comes to winter, it's going to be a lot colder than it is in the summer, and vice versa. If you're in a hot climate, it will still be colder in the winter, whenever winter is in the year for you. Now, pretty much all cacti, except for like rainforest cacti and epiphytic cacti, the desert cacti, they like to have a winter rest. So that means that you actually do not water your cactus at all in the winter months. Now, here in the UK, I usually stop watering at the end of September, beginning of October, depending on how warm it still is at that time. And I won't give one drop of water at all to any of my cacti until about the end of March or the beginning of April. Now, you might find that a bit shocking, especially if you're a beginner, to think that the plant can survive without water for that long. But that really is what these plants have evolved to do, to not need much water at all. And that's why overwatering is such a big killer, because people can't believe how long they can actually survive for without water. And that's because in the winter, they've gone into dormancy. They're in a winter rest, so they're not actively absorbing water through their roots anyway. So if you was to water your cactus during the winter, that water would just sit in the pot unused, which will just lead straight away to root rot and end up killing your cactus. Now, even with the succulents and the rainforest cacti that do like a bit of water still during the winter, because it's winter time and it's colder, you're going to reduce the amount of watering anyway. How often you water will still greatly reduce compared to in the summer. So all these things are different things that you need to think about, and that might sound like a lot to think about all in one go, seeing as you're a beginner. But if you just try and consider these little things bit by bit, then over time you'll get used to how things are and how your plants behave and how they respond. And you'll find that in no time at all, you're able to look after your plants successfully. So when you actually come to water a cactus or a succulent, what you want to do is give that plant a nice deep watering, let it drain through, and then leave that plant completely until the soil is completely dry, 100% dried out. And then you do another deep watering. Now, with rainforest cacti, they like to be a bit more moist, so when you give the next watering, that might be a little bit sooner than it is for desert cacti, but they still like to have time to dry out after a nice deep watering. With other plants, you might give them a little bit of water every day or every other day. Some plants you might mist, things like that. You don't want to do anything like that with cacti succulents. They don't like humidity at all, so definitely don't mist cacti succulents. Shallow watering or little bits of water every now and then, that will keep the soil too moist. It will cause the plant to take up too much water. It can lead to the plant's leaves bursting or the body of the cactus itself bursting because it's took up too much water. Having too much water around the roots can lead to rot. And also, not allowing the water to get right through the soil to the bottom of the pot will lead to the roots staying near the top of the soil. So you'll have a very shallow root system. So the deep watering also helps to promote root growth down to the bottom of the pot. So next, I just want to go over a few of the signs, classic signs of overwatering. So in succulents like echeverias and things like that, if the bottom leaves are going yellow, and I find they go a little bit translucent and they're dying rapidly, then that's a classic sign of overwatering. With cacti, If your cactus has gone squishy and starts going mushy and you can see brown and black areas, then that's definitely root rot and the plant has actually rotted inside. With succulents, they do lose their leaves naturally from the bottom over time as those leaves get older and they get replaced with new growth at the top. But those leaves will slowly be naturally absorbed by the plant and then die. So if you've got leaves dying at the bottom, don't worry too much. As long as the plant overall seems healthy, then you should be okay. Another thing to think about is if you think that your plant is thirsty and you water it, and after a few days it doesn't seem like it's absorbed any of that water and it still looks just as thirsty as it did before you watered it, then that's a classic sign that the roots aren't taking up water, which means that the roots could be gone or damaged, or your plant could be really unhealthy due to overwatering, or maybe even other issues like pest issues. If you've got mealybugs, like root mealybugs for example, and they've like damaged the roots, then those roots aren't going to be able to take up water properly when you do water your plant. And then that means that that water is just sitting there around the roots, which is just going to make things even worse. So one big tip is to observe your plants and see how they respond at different times and after watering, how they look before watering. And that can help you figure out whether your plant is doing well or if it's starting to turn sick and things like that. So based on all this and based on the fact that these plants are designed to be able to cope in dry climates, that kind of shows you that a good tip is that underwatering is always better than overwatering. If you're not quite sure whether your plant's thirsty or not, then leave it a week. The plant's not going to die. These plants can go ages without water and can be really dehydrated and still rejuvenate as soon as you water them. So if you're not quite sure, just wait. You can easily wait a week or two and the plant will be fine. So one important thing that you can do is learn a bit more about the individual plants that you've got. So if you don't actually know the name of the plant, then there's plenty of forums online. The British Cactus and Succulent Society have got a Facebook page and they've also got a forum on their website, and there's plenty of other forums out there where you can actually request IDs of plants. If you just post some photos and ask people, there's going to be someone out there that can identify that plant for you. And with that information, you can then search around the internet about that plant to find out things like where it comes from in nature and how to go cultivate it and different care tips. And that will also help you when it comes to watering. If you've got a specific plant and from the research you've done it says that it needs barely any water, then you know to water that less. If you've got a plant and when you research it says it likes to be kept a little bit more moist than the average cactus, then you know that maybe you need to water that one slightly more often. But again, be careful that you don't overwater. So learning about your individual plants and where they come from in nature, what kind of climate their natural habitat is like, and different cultivation notes, that can be a really important tool to help you water your plants properly. And I'll try to remember to give some links in the description of this video of good websites that I use to help me with things like that. So as a starting point, I just wanted to talk about a few of the main different types of cacti and succulents, just to help you get a bit more understanding about how different plants have got different watering needs. So for cacti, you've mainly got your desert cacti and your jungle cacti. So desert cacti, as you might imagine, they live in dry, arid places in nature that get very little rainfall, whereas jungle cacti, they're usually the epiphytic cacti and they grow on trees and things like that, and they normally have less bright blasting sun on them because the tree canopy will be shading out some of the light, and it'll also be a bit more humid. So those cacti generally like a little bit more moisture than the ones from arid conditions. So you can see there that desert cacti you'll water less often than the jungle cacti, And the jungle cacti, you'll also not really, usually you don't give them a winter dormancy. They usually do like to have a little bit, obviously less than in the summer, but a little bit of water during the winter. Now there's also a genus of plants called euphorbias, and that's a massive genus. Some of them aren't even succulent at all, but quite a few of them actually look like cacti, and people mistake them for cacti, but actually they're not. So I think the best bet with those is to treat them a little bit more like succulents. Now with succulents, I find it can vary a lot. They like usually less water than jungle cacti. But I find, depending on the particular plant, some of them, like for example this Echeveria agavoides at the back here, this is probably my least watered plant in my whole collection. I find that I really give this very little water. I can go 2 months without watering this and it will be fine. If I find that it's really easy to water it too often, even though I've left such a long period of time in between. Whereas here in my climate, in the summer, I usually water my cacti once a month, unless it's really hot, and then it might be every 3 weeks. But this particular succulent back here, it can go ages without water, and I'll really notice straight away if I have overwatered it or I've watered it too soon, because it'll start losing leaves at the bottom. So I find that with succulents, the best thing to do is learn how to know if it needs water, learn the signs, and we'll go over those a bit later in the video. But with succulents, if you know how to tell if that individual succulent needs water or not, then that's usually your best bet to follow your instinct with that. And if you're not quite sure, then as I said before, just leave it another week. If you're still not sure, leave it another week again. If you think to yourself, oh yes, this definitely needs water, then go for it. And also with the succulents, like the jungle cacti, they still want a little bit of water during the winter. And with euphorbias, that's why it's better to treat them like the succulents, because you'll be able to tell from the individual plant whether it needs water or not. Some of them will want a lot more water than your average succulent or jungle cactus. Like I said, some of them aren't even succulents at all, so they'd be more like normal plants with how you would water them, whereas a lot of them are succulents. And don't be fooled by the fact that they might look like cacti, they're not. Treat them as a succulent and you can't go wrong. Now there is one kind of succulent that's called a masembe, and those are things like lithops, and they're usually plants that grow in Africa, and those, they usually want even less water than your average cactus or succulent, and they have special watering needs, and that's why some people can find them difficult, especially beginners, difficult to know how to water, because with those, for example, they have, you know, like with lithops, they have 2 leaves, and those leaves will eventually split, and then they get reabsorbed by the plant itself as 2 new leaves grow to replace that. And with those, when they're splitting, you don't water them at all, because it's using the water that's stored in the leaves that are dying. Those leaves are being absorbed to make the new leaves. So if you water during that time, then the plant's going to get way too much water, and it will lead to it splitting or rotting, which will just kill the plant. So with those, it's a bit more tricky, because sometimes it can be hard to tell whether it's about to split. If you water when it's just about to split, that can also cause similar issues as well. So with those, it's usually better to try and research and learn a bit more about them in order to be able to water them properly, because it's just completely different set of rules for those sort of plants. Now you might have noticed that so far I haven't said, oh, you water your cactus once a month, you water your succulent every 3 weeks. I haven't said anything like that, and that's because it's pretty much impossible, in my opinion, to give a set schedule that will work for everyone. Everyone lives in a different climate, they've got different temperatures, they have different levels of sunlight, different levels of humidity. Even the fact that if you're growing in your home, then the environment, the microclimate in that home is going to be completely different to the climate in a greenhouse in the same person's back garden sort of thing. Or maybe they've grown it in a conservatory. The environment in a conservatory, again, could be completely different to a greenhouse that is right next to that conservatory in the same garden. People all over the world have got completely different climates. So I think it's impossible to say. So for me, myself, in the summer, I might water my cacti once a month. And then the succulents around, you know, it could be 3 weeks, it could be 4 weeks, or it could be 5 weeks, depending on the individual succulent. But then if we have a massive heat wave all of a sudden, so that the temperatures are higher and the humidity is lower, I might find that I need to bring the watering forward by a week for everything. And that just shows that it completely depends on the environment. And also the pots and things like that I've already mentioned. If you've got something in a very well-draining mix in a terracotta pot, you might have to water that a little bit more often than something that's in not such a great mix, that's in a plastic pot with top dressing on it. So personally, I think that you need to consider your own personal climate and own personal environment and use that to help you figure out how often you need to water. Like I said, I might water my plants once a month in the summer, but then someone else who lives, you know, in the UK, it's well known for being cold and wet and damp. Someone that lives in a much hotter country, they might find that their plants are really struggling after 2 weeks without water, or even a week without water. They might find they need to water theirs every week in the summer. And also things like ventilation and airflow, that can help to dry out your pots quicker. So it's really hard to say. You just need to experiment, and I believe that's the best way to learn, is to just experiment and figure out for yourself what works, what don't work, and then use that knowledge that you gain over time. That's why we have beginners and experts, because it takes time to learn how to do these things. And everyone loses plants. Don't worry too much if you lose a plant here and there. Everyone does it. Even people that have been grown for years will lose a plant unexpectedly. But the more you can learn about how to water them properly, then the more success you're likely to have. So how exactly do we learn how to tell if a cacti or succulent needs watering or not? Well, the thing that I think is the easiest, and the thing that I do the most to be able to tell, is to look at the plant itself. Cacti that are full of water will be a lot firmer and a lot more plump, and that goes the same for succulents as well. The leaves will be really tight and plump. If the leaves are really tight, or the body of the cactus is really tight and plump and firm, and you water it, then there's nowhere else for that water to fit into. And so that can lead to splitting, and too much water can lead to rot, and then you'll lose your plant. So I'll usually find it easier to tell with the succulents, to be fair, but with cacti, like with this little seedling here, they have ribs and tubercles. So you can see there the little bits, you can see definition of, you know, little shapes poking out. Those are the tubercles. And the cactus at the back over here, this has more ribs going up and down. So with those, if you notice that they're not as clearly defined, then that kind of suggests that the plant is more full of water, because as it fills up, those like crevices will push out more, so it will look more full and plump. And then when it's thirsty, as the water is getting used up, those will contract in and shrink in, and so they'll become more defined. So you can use that to tell. And for example, with this particular seedling down here, I find that after watering it, after like a day or two, I'll look back at the plant and it would be massive compared to what it was before I watered it. Like, you'll really see a difference in size, and I hope to show that later on in this video. So with the succulents, I find it a lot easier to tell, because if you look at this one here, you can see that the leaves at the bottom, and even halfway up, so right up here, Can you see how wrinkly those leaves are? So that shows you straight away that this plant is using up its water and it's becoming thirsty. Now with this Echeveria back here, so one other thing you can do is just feel the leaves. So can you see there how flexible those look? As it gets higher up the plant, they'll be more firmer, and right at the bottom they'll be a lot more flexible. So if just the bottom leaves are flexible, but the ones like on the second row up or above are quite firm, then I'll probably not bother watering it, because that could just be that those leaves are about to be absorbed by the plant and replaced with the new growth up the top. But if it feels quite flexible, quite far up, like this one is, so like especially there, that leaf's quite flexible, so then I'd say to myself, yeah, this is time to water this one, because a lot of the leaves are starting to show signs of being depleted of water. Now, even though this one is quite flexible, I could easily leave this another week, probably more, and it will still be fine. It still won't die on me. But at this point, it should be okay to water it. Now with this one here, this down here, it's got a little bit of flexibility, but it's still quite firm. And these are very firm up here. So I would say that you don't need to water this one yet, because there's not going to be much space for the water to fill into anyway. It's still got plenty of reserves, and that's why succulents have chubby leaves. It's a way of storing water, like a camel stores water in its humps. So for me, that's probably the easiest way to be able to tell whether my succulent needs water or not. And if I'm not quite sure whether it's quite ready for water or not, then I'll just leave it a bit longer. And by that point, you'll be able to see if it's shriveled up more. If it starts shriveling up a lot more, then you know actually this is time to water. But if it's pretty much the same after a week, then you know that it was okay to not need water so soon. And one thing to remember is that if you overwater your succulent, then that can look a lot similar, because the leaves will start shriveling up at the bottom and dying. However, like I mentioned earlier, those leaves will be going yellow, and I find they look a bit translucent, and it will happen a lot quicker, I find, a lot more rapidly. And also, what I'm hoping to show you in this video is that I'm going to water these plants here that I feel need watering, and then show you after a day or two just how much they've changed and how much they've plumped up. And if you water a plant and it doesn't change and it doesn't improve its condition, then you know that water isn't what it needed. There's something else going on. It might have been overwatered, or it might be sick in some way, and the water's not being absorbed by the plant and is not helping the plant. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to water these 3 plants here, and then we're going to have a look at them in a day or two once they've had a chance to absorb the water and plump up, just to show you how different the plant will look once it's been watered and when it's got enough water, just to help you kind of understand the points I'm trying to make in this video, and to see for yourself exactly how these plants respond. So with this seedling here, I'm actually going to try and measure it roughly, and then we'll have a look to see how much bigger it gets after it's been watered. So I'd say it's roughly about 2 centimetres across, just a bit less. Just under 2. And just over 2.5. 1.5, sorry. High. So I'd say it's about 18 across. I couldn't quite see down there, so I'm just doing it off camera. And like 16 or 17 high mil. Right then, so I'm now going to water the first plant, and like I said, you want to give it a deep watering. So I usually just, this pot's a bit over full to be fair, I'll just let it sit on the top and just give it a chance to soak through. And as you can see, we've already got water dripping through the bottom. That shows that it is well draining. Let's give it a bit more just to give it a chance to get a nice deep watering. And that's really all you need to do. So then I'll just put this aside on the draining board to let the excess water drain off. You don't want cacti to be sitting in water, so if you've got those little saucers that you put under your pots, make sure that you don't leave any water in the bottom of that pot, bottom of that saucer, because that will just keep the feet, well, the bottom of the roots, which people call the feet of the plant, to stay wet, and that just straight away leads to root rot. So I'm going to let that one drain. And then again with this one, you can see how wrinkly the leaves look. I'm going to do the same with this. And see how quick that starts draining through. Just do that again to give it a nice deep watering. And then the last one. This is a bigger pot, so this will take more water before it starts to drain. Oh. Sorry about the noise, someone's cutting their trees down. So you can see that's dripping through now, it's drained through. Just going to put a bit more in there just to make sure it gets a nice deep watering. Then I'm just going to take this away and leave it to drain. So I've now left it a couple of days since these have been watered. And I'm not sure how easy it will be to tell on camera, but when I feel these leaves now around the middle and going up to the top, they're a lot more firmer. You can feel that they're a lot fuller than they were before. So that's how I know that this plant has taken up the water that I've given it. So with this cactus, maybe it's because it's a seedling that it's more obvious, but it really has increased in size by quite a bit. So if you remember, we measured it when I watered it, and if I have a look now, it's just over 2 centimetres each way. So I'd say about 21 mil each way, which is bigger than it was before. And even looking at the cactus, you can see that it looks a lot plumper, because obviously it's took up water and that water has to go somewhere. So that's just another way of how you can see whether your plant needs watering or not. If it looks very shriveled up and doesn't look very plump, then that's an indication that it needs water. However, if it looks quite swollen and plump, then you know that it's got plenty in reserve still. So here's the Pachyphytum, and as you can see, it's really plumped up since before it was watered. Now you might notice that on the very bottom row of leaves, you can see a tiny bit of wrinkling, for example on this leaf here. Now that's nothing to worry about, that's totally fine. As long as you can see that the majority of the plant has absorbed water, then the plant's completely fine and is fully watered. I often find that with succulents such as this, and sometimes the echeverias, that because the bottom leaves are the oldest growth, they will have a bit of wrinkling. Those will be the first leaves to die off and get absorbed by the plant as the new growth comes from the top. So don't worry, that's completely fine. What you don't want to do, and the worst thing that you could do, would be to think, oh, there's still a little bit of wrinkling at the bottom, so I need to water it again. Because what you'll find is that these leaves that are already completely full at the top, they will try and absorb that water, that extra water that you've put in, and that can lead to them splitting. So you'll have leaves completely split open, which is basically ruining the leaf, and the leaf will just die then. or worst case would be that you actually get root rot and kill the plant completely. So don't worry if you've got a tiny bit of wrinkling at the bottom still, that's completely fine. And even if it's up to like the second layer, I still wouldn't worry about it, as long as you can see that the plant itself has, you know, overall has absorbed water, then you know that it'll be fine for a while. So just experiment, like I say, and just learn how your plants behave and you'll be fine. As long as you wait until this soil has completely dried out before you do water again, then you should have nothing to worry about. So you might have noticed then that I watered my cacti and succulents from above. Now personally I think it's personal preference. Some people like to fill up a tray with water and stick the pots in and then let that soil absorb the water over time until the top of the soil starts to become damp. Now personally I feel like that lets too much water get held in the soil, but again that can depend on how well draining your soil mix is. With some of the pots that have got very well draining soil, I feel like it can take ages for that water to get absorbed up, because it's more grit and things like that don't really absorb water in the pot, so it takes a long time to come up. But then there's also problems with watering from above, and that is that water can get into the crown of the plant, into the rosette of echeverias and things like that, and if that water stays sitting there, then that can also lead to rot in the top of the plant and in the crown of the plant and in and around the leaves. So when you water from above, make sure that the water goes straight into the top of the soil and down, and it doesn't actually land on any of the, you know, the plant leaves or body of the cactus itself. Also, if you're watering from below, you need to really make sure that you drain off the trays afterwards and that you take the pots out of the trays, because if they stay in there too long, then that again can lead to rot. So really it's just personal preference and what you prefer, but as long as you follow the right tips for the right method of watering, then you should be okay. If you water from below, make sure you don't leave them in there too long and drain it off. If you water from above, make sure it doesn't get onto the actual plant body itself. And if you do accidentally get a bit of water into the top of an echeveria rosette, for example, or on the top of a cactus, then you can always try and absorb that with a bit of kitchen roll or blow it off. Or one really good thing that I think you should do after watering your plants is to make sure that they get a lot of ventilation, because that can just help get rid of any humidity that's around them, or at least reduce the amount of humidity. And if you have got the leaves or body of the plant wet, then that will help dry it off and reduce the risk of rot. You might also be wondering about the type of water that you need to use. Now obviously rainwater is always best, but that's not always possible for some people to collect, especially if you live in like a flat, for example. Then it'll be pretty much impossible if you haven't got a garden to put anything in to actually collect rainwater. Now if you live in a hard water area, then that can be a bit of a problem, because there's lots of like build up and salts and lime in the water, so that can be an issue, and you might need to try and like clean up that water a bit. One thing you can do as well is tap water that's treated with like chlorine, for example, is you can fill up a bowl with water the night before and just leave that overnight, and that will help some of the chemicals evaporate off. For me, I'm quite lucky because I'm in a soft water area, so tap water usually is fine for me because I don't need to worry about those salt buildups, for example. It's much less if you've got soft water. Another thing is the temperature of the water. If you've got freezing cold water, that can shock the roots. You're better off having something that's around room temperature. Obviously you don't want to do hot water because that can burn the roots, but something around room temperature is probably best. And also in terms of pH for water, as long as it's around a neutral, something in the neutral range, then you should be okay for the majority of plants. So the time of day that you actually water your plants is also another important thing to think about. Now, a lot of people say to not water at night at all, and that's because the rate of evaporation will be a lot less, and the less evaporation, then the more chance of fungal or bacterial infections taking hold, so it's best to avoid that if possible. And also, even though it's better to water in the day, the time of day is also important as well. So if you've got a really hot sunny day and you've just watered your plants, it's midday when the sun's at its hottest and brightest, and you've got a few little drops of water here and there on the leaves of succulents or on the body of a cactus, and then you stick it back on your windowsill or in your greenhouse right in that blasting sun, then that can be a big problem, because those water droplets will heat up quickly, and that can basically cook the area that it's on the leaf. So spots on leaves will get cooked where there's water droplets. And also, even the fact that the soil's wet, if it's really hot, then that water in that pot can heat up, and that can lead to burning of the roots, which you want to avoid. So it's better to, if it's a cloudy day, then you should be okay to water at any point in the day. But if you know it's going to be a sunny day, and it doesn't even have to be as sunny as you think it needs to be. If you've got plants behind glass, then that glass will intensify the heat from the sun, like how you can with a magnifying glass. So that's something else to think about. So you're better off doing it either early in the morning or after the sun has started to, not be as bright in the afternoon, coming up into the evening. But I think personally you're better off doing it in the morning. And I do think it's a good idea to try and get as much ventilation as you can around your plants, especially if you just water them. If it's the summertime and you can have your windows open, then do that. Try and get as much airflow around your plants as you can, because at the end of the day, plants need air anyway. So that's just a good practice. And what I also think is good practice is to just get into the habit of checking on your plants quite often, and that can just be like once a week. Just have a little look around your collection and see, does anything look sick? Does anything look a lot thirstier than you expected it to by this point? And so on and so on. But at the end of the day, I think the best advice is just to experiment a little bit and see what works best for you and what works best for your actual environment and climate, and all those different factors that we've talked about in this video. What works good for you might work terrible for someone else. What works brilliant for me could work terrible for you, and so on, because where you are and where you are growing your plants could be completely different to how I'm keeping my plants. As you found out in this video so far, there's a whole lot of different things that affect loads of different conditions and things to consider that actually affect the watering of your plants. It's more than just the fact of putting water in a pot, with the climate, the soil type, the actual pots, how much heat they're getting, the airflow, the temperature, all that sort of thing has a massive effect on your actual watering. And that's why you can't say to anyone that there's a set schedule of how they need to water. And I want this video to be more of a guideline to follow, not rather than something that's set in stone, because I can't say what your climate is like in comparison to mine and say that you should definitely do this or do that. However, we know that for the way that cacti and succulents have evolved, they need less water than, traditional average plants. So as long as you take that one thing away, that they need less water, then that's a really good starting point. And then just experiment with the different things I've discussed in this video and see what works for you. More experienced growers might give advice saying, oh, you should definitely do this and you should definitely do that. But them themselves have got their own climate that they're growing their plants in, and they're a lot more experienced and now know how to control the actual environment that they're growing their plants in. So what they've discovered for themselves through their own experimentation will work brilliantly for them, but for someone who's a beginner, it could work terrible. So I really think experimenting with these guidelines and seeing what works best for you, just use everything as a guideline and a starting point to get started. And then over time, you'll learn and you'll become a much better grower and you'll be a much better plant parent. At the end of the day, if you're doing a particular thing and it's working brilliantly for you and your plants are perfectly healthy, then don't stop doing that because somebody said that a specific thing must be done that's opposite to what you're doing. However, don't be afraid to experiment a little bit. If an experiment goes bad, then you know to stay with what you're already doing. If you do an experiment and it actually turns out better for your plants, then that's a really good thing to try to continue with the rest of your plants. It's all about learning and, getting experiences, both good and bad, in order to, become a better grower. I think a lot of people can be quick to jump to say that the way they're doing something is the right way and the only way. So I don't want you to think that everything that I've said in this video is 100% what you have to do. It's just guidelines. Learn and experiment for yourselves. Now this video ended up being a lot longer than I expected it to be. And especially because this is aimed at beginners, you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed by this point. Oh my God, there's so many different things to think of. I didn't realise it was so complicated and so involved. But don't worry about all that. If you only take one thing away from this video, then that should be that you need to remember to not overwater cacti and succulents. That's the most simplest thing to take away from this whole video. And at the end of the day, I've shown you that underwatering is a lot better than overwatering. If a cactus can go the whole of the winter without a drop of water and be perfectly fine, then you know that you don't need to worry about underwatering. It's just the overwatering. So if you're a complete beginner and you do feel overwhelmed, just take that one tip for now. Do not overwater, and then over time, slowly expand on that and experiment with the different guidelines and different tips and tricks that I've pointed out in this video and build upon that. And in no time at all, you'll find that everything becomes second nature and you feel like you're gaining loads of experience and you're really enjoying the hobby. So I hope that you've really enjoyed this video and I hope it's been really informative to not just beginners but to everyone. And I'd really like to know what you think. Leave me some comments down below. Let me know what you think and whether there was anything that you think I should have gone into more detail on or anything that I missed out. I'm also hoping to do a whole series of videos like this on different things such as, pots and soil, fertilising, light requirements, all those sort of things in a lot more detail. This video was just aimed at the whole watering aspect of the hobby. So feel free that if you've got any ideas of things that you'd like me to do a video on, just leave a comment and I'll see what I can do. Also, if you did like this video, then I'd really appreciate it if you could click the like button. And I'd also love it if you could subscribe to my channel, and that will help me to feel motivated to do more videos. Because at the end of the day, I just want to help teach people about the hobby and help them enjoy it like I enjoy it. So, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed this. Bye.